Now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees.
Well, hello, and welcome to Boomer Life here on CISL 650. By now, you probably figured out that we're going to be spending a little time on this episode of the program talking about money. In fact, that's exactly what we're here to talk about. Well, kind of. We're talking about debt problems and solutions to debt problems. We have back with us in studio George Abakhan, the president of Abakhan and Associates, and George is also joined in studio by Nicole Clarke. Nicole is a bankruptcy and insolvency counselor, also with Abakhan and Associates. George and Nicole, welcome back to Boomer Life. Nice to see you both again.
Nice to see you, son.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Well, it's good to have you back with us. We're talking about problems, lots of problems. And in these days of cheap money, it seems that more and more of us are finding it, even easier to get into these debt problems. George, is cheap money at unbelievably historic low interest rate levels just too darn tempting for too many people?
I'm not sure I actually go along with that necessarily.
Okay.
Sure, mortgage money is cheap, but credit card money, lines of credit are cheaper generally, but credit card money is generally 19 to 30%.
So
depending on where you go.
So we're kind of deluded in that regard, because when we think about the interest rate environment that we live in, Nicole, it's mortgages at under 3% for 5-year fixed. It's cars at 0 or 0.9% for 72 months. It's cheap. But as George just says, not on your Visa card. That's still up around 20%. And we tend not to pay attention to that uncomfortable interest rate, do we?
Correct. Most people do carry a balance on their credit card, so they are paying that interest each month.
So, George, is that where the bulk of people's debt problems begin? Is it with credit cards rather than other types of financial loans and arrangements?
Well, it can also be with auto cars or car loans, because with car loans, for instance, you may have a zero mortgage rate or a zero loan rate, but what they've done is built it into the profit.
Mm-hmm.
So they effectively are taking a rate of interest on it. You're just paying more for the car over the life of the loan. But what happens is the payment is more on the car loan, and you have to pay it from other sources of income. So generally they find a way of either getting advances from credit cards, and of course credit cards have the 20% rate.
Yep.
All the debtor generally thinks of is how much money do I have to pay. It's when they end up with a problem like a divorce or a settlement or loss of income, going into retirement pensions. Mm-hmm. Then their income is reduced, and that's when they have to start thinking about doing some kind of debt settlement.
Yeah, Nicole, we've learned a couple of very interesting surveys from the Canadian Banking Association in recent months. Number one, for every dollar the average Canadian makes, he or she owes $1.63. And it's also determined by the same survey people that a typical family, in many cases, were they to miss one paycheck, would be severely hooped in terms of their ability to deal with their regular financial obligations. George, that's a little scary. A lot of people living right on the margins there.
There's a lot of people living right on the margin, exactly. The average debt in BC is around $40,000 without mortgages. So $40,000, you're probably going to be paying close to $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And would most of that debt, George, then be credit card debt in one form or another?
Yeah, most of it's credit card debt or lines of credit. It could include the car loan or the lease payment.
Right.
What we advocate is that if they don't need the F-350 Ford to go to pick up groceries, that they maybe go and get something smaller and save themselves $1,500 a month in lease payments.
Right.
And gas and insurance.
Nicole, one of the you are at Abakhan and Associates. You take a lot of phone calls.
Correct.
You're kind of the frontline troops, or part of that frontline team. And we were talking over coffee before we began today, and you were remarking that an awful lot of people who call you in considerable distress actually have no real idea exactly how much they owe. They know they owe a pile, but beyond that, specifics aren't too easily come by. What's that all about?
A lot of people, money stress is really hard, you know, and there's other stresses in life. People are dealing with health, you know, everything. But basically, people want to put it out of their head, and they go along. And right now, we're experiencing a huge call volume because people are doing their taxes.
Sure, of course.
And they're finding out they owe on their taxes, and then they're looking at their bills, and they just don't even know how much all of it is together. So they really have to think, you know, one by one, because most people don't even just have one credit card with that $40,000 balance. It's over a few different credit cards. And what we find sometimes is when people come in, they have stacks of mail and bills that are unopened because they just really want to put it out of their mind.
Do they actually bring the stacks of unopened bills to the meeting with you?
Yes, they do. And we go through it and we open that and go through each balance one by one.
I started off by talking about these times of cheap money. George, are you noticing in these times, within the last year or two, when money has been quite inexpensive, has there been an uptick in indebtedness in British Columbia or across Canada because of that? Or are we still carrying on at about normal volumes?
I think the statistics will show that we're actually increasing our consumer debt, if you like.
Thus the $1.63 for every dollar we make.
Well,
number.
no, that includes mortgage debt.
Okay.
So if you take out the mortgage debt, in the case that I mentioned before, it was about $40,000 in the case of BC. In Quebec, I think it goes down as low as $10,000 is the average debt. But what's happening is that debt is increasing. Alberta at the moment is considerable. Isn't that right, Nicole?
You've been digesting some Alberta numbers, Nicole, in advance of all of this. And, of course, one has to, and George mentioned this just a few minutes ago, you know, everything's ticking along nicely until something happens in your life, an event like, a job loss. And next door in Alberta, they're experiencing job losses in absolutely jaw-dropping numbers. And I would imagine, Nicole, some of those numbers you've got in front of you would reflect the upheaval in economics in Alberta.
Yeah, this is just a little bit on a recent report done by Bank of Montreal, and it was showing that the average household debt, including mortgages, is approximately $125,000 in Alberta. BC is about $100,000, and Ontario is about $67,000. But that is including the mortgages.
But George, I suppose then when people get to a point where they're considering help, when the debt, because we try to manage. In fact, you've told us in previous meetings of people who will go and run up the credit card to the maximum. And then rather than turning around and beginning to address that debt, they'll go get another credit card so they'll have more cash to service the maximum debt they've accumulated on the previous credit card. That's not really much of a solution, is it?
Well, no, it's not a solution at all. And unfortunately, it just gets them deeper in debt. Then the credit card companies, I think, to some extent, are to blame for this because they used to have, get my credit card, and we'll take over the existing line of credit from your previous credit card holder, pay them out, and you get 6 months interest free,
right,
or a low interest rate for about 6 months. But then at the end of that 6 months, they've got the high interest rate again. And in the case of the new credit card, the old credit card was paid out, and now they've got the availability of that credit card. So over 6 months, they probably acquired twice as much debt that they had before, because it compounds. It's but then that's where we can get rid of that debt for them.
How frequently, Nicole, do people call you that are just past the point of losing it? They've still got a pretty keen handle on the numbers. They're not going to show up with a basket full of unopened bills or statements, but they're just about to lose it. They can feel it starting to slip away, and they go, wait a second, we just don't want to go there any further than we already are. Is that a common call, or more frequently are people calling going, help, I'm underwater?
Well, it's not uncommon. What we do urge people to do is when you start to think that you are having problems, you should contact a trustee and find out what your options are at that point in time.
Right.
Because, with the debt settlement, the earlier you can afford to do something, or if you're expecting a windfall, you could offer that in your debt settlement.
Sure.
So sometimes what we experience is people do call us, and again, they don't want to deal with it. So they've heard the solutions. It is a very terrifying, it's a very difficult thing to go through. And, they come in for a consultation, they put it away, we follow up with them every so often. And then 2 years later, you see them, but they're at the point now where they could have possibly have done a proposal to avoid the bankruptcy, but now their only option is the bankruptcy because they needed to have to do something anyway. They just weren't ready emotionally to do it at that time.
Right. George, you're a trustee in bankruptcy. Do you scare people? Are they afraid to call you because of that trustee in bankruptcy designation the government of Canada has bestowed on you? Would they rather talk to a credit counselor because it sounds less, overwhelming? Do you find people put off a little by that?
They'd want to talk to Nicole more than they want to talk to me, but really, I find that I can generally talk to them pretty quickly and establish that they don't have to go bankrupt. As I say, 65% of our insolvencies go through in the form of a debt settlement, which is is not a bankruptcy. You don't go bankrupt. You've made a settlement with your creditors. And I generally can evaluate that within the first 15 minutes of discussion with somebody on the phone. And at the end of it, they come in saying that I've been told I have to go bankrupt. And after I finish with them, they generally say, well, I didn't realize I had that option. And I said, well, do you want to fill in an information sheet, an application form? And then I'll email them, because most people these days have email.
Sure.
The odd one, actually, I still do with snail mail. But, and lo and behold, within a week or two, they'll be back with an application form, and we process the paperwork. I generally establish the payment amount within that first 15-minute telephone call. The fact that I can reduce their payments from $1,000 a month to $250 a month, I mean, they are pretty relieved at the end of it.
I should think so.
And I said, now, do you want to do this? And they say, oh, yes. I never even realized that there was the option there.
Exactly. Well, no, it was just whether or not people were sort of spooked by the term trustee in bankruptcy. But you are a professional counselor, for crying out loud. You're the least scary guy, one of the least scary guys I've met in a long time. Quite an amiable fellow, as a matter of fact, as are his colleagues at Abakhan and Associates. Our guest in studio, Nicole Clarke, who is a counselor, and George Abakhan, who is a trustee and the boss at Abakhan and Associates. You can check them out online, by the way, at abakhan.com, and that's spelled ABAKHAN.com. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650. We're back with lots more right after this.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.